Hi everyone, thank you so much for clicking on my presentation today. My name is Taylor Ralph. I'm the Collection Assessment Librarian at Oregon State University, and today I'm going to be talking about assessing open, so approaching the challenges, barriers, and opportunities. So how do we define open? We're all familiar with open access, open scholarship, and basically what we're looking at is enabling the broadest possible distribution and use of scholarly work. Really, it's all about reducing or removing barriers to access and sharing and distributing that information. So today we're mostly going to focus on open access journals and databases and those types of electronic resources. But really, the tools and the strategies that we talk about today can also be applied to open educational resources and textbooks and things of that nature as well. So this research really came out of a project that we've been doing at Oregon State University, where we're starting to think about the state of open. So we've been kind of tracking that scholarly communication landscape, and we know that, things are shifting toward open. And as librarians, we think that's a great thing, but it's also something that we need to start preparing for. So nationally, we're familiar with the OSTP memo, which requires that government-funded research be made available fully open access with no embargoes by 2025. We also saw a lot of shifting from publishers and vendors and libraries themselves during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were trying to make resources available to all of our communities and our remote communities, as we were not all together in the libraries. And of course, another concern that's becoming, increasingly prevalent is the affordability of higher education. And as librarians, we're of course interested in cutting those costs for our students and our researchers, and open resources is one of the ways to go about that. We also see the shift in libraries, so the popularity of transformative agreements. We get emails from vendors saying, we can work on this transformative agreement and flip some scholarship to open. So some libraries have been pursuing that. There's also a shift toward open for major publishers and university presses. So for major publishers, that is, increasing opportunities to publish gold OA, and some university presses are, going green OA and making all of their content open. We also see a disinvestment in large subscription packages, the pricing, transparency. Some of these things are becoming unsustainable, especially as, in these large packages, most of the content isn't being used. And as more of the content becomes open, we're starting to question, well, why are we paying all of this much for this big subscription? And it's also a unique opportunity for us, the shift to open, because we have positional expertise within our institution. We've seen a lot of universities, they're interested in open scholarship, open access, affordability, and we as librarians and library staff can be the experts within the institution to help facilitate that shift. So for OA resources in libraries, of course, there are a ton of opportunities. Like I mentioned, they're increasingly prevalent. We increase access to scholarly content, and we support our library ethics and values, right? We want to get our researchers that information, high quality information with a lack of barriers to that access. But of course, there are challenges as well. So there's still a mistrust of OA resources among, research faculty and librarians. We really have to decide and vet, what are we going to add to our collection? Oftentimes it can be difficult to catalog and make some of these resources discoverable at different levels. And then sometimes, of course, these links break, or something happens with access and there's no centralized point necessarily to ask for help in some cases, so we do have to keep up with resource maintenance as well. Getting that faculty and researcher buy-in, and then of course assessment, which I'm going to talk about today. And you might notice that a lot of these challenges fall specifically on technical resources and or technical services, and also e-resource librarians. So why we do collection assessment in general in libraries, and why it's important to do this for OA resources as well, because we're acting as responsible stewards of our library collection. We're ensuring that our researchers have access to relevant content. We also have to respond and manage library collections budgets. So the integration of some of these resources could potentially, save us some money if we're not investing in some of these larger packages. We also do assessment to maintain our catalog, make sure it's not overflowing, and that it's easy for our researchers to find exactly what they need. They're not kind of wading through a bunch of irrelevant resources. We also do assessment to promote targeted resources, like we get something new or we see something that hasn't been used in a few years, and we love to let people know, like, hey, this is available for you and it's accessible through the library. We also assess our collection to negotiate with library publishers and vendors. So we're looking at increasing OA Gold content. We are looking at how much our authors are, maybe paying in APCs versus the cost of our subscription. So these are all tools that we can think about as we're enhancing collection for our researchers. And although there's no outright cost necessarily to providing access to OA resources, it is still an investment and requires staff time, like I mentioned, especially in technical services. So there are standard and well-documented challenges to assessing open resources, and one of those is the lack of standardized reporting system and data. So for e-resources, we can generally rely on Counter 5 reports, so we can use the same metrics and measures to compare resources against each other, to do direct comparisons. Can't do that with OA resources, and in most cases there's no vendor statistics available, or there's no infrastructure to track each institution's IP or things like that. So we're not really able to get that standard usage data that we're used to relying on for collection assessment. There's also limited assessment at the title level, and it can be time consuming and confusing. So which tools do we have access to that we can use to assess open scholarship, and also what questions do we need answered to make sure that we're really being responsible stewards of these resources as well. And so that's what we'll get into next. So when we're thinking about assessing OA coverage, some of the questions that we might ask are what percentage of our subscription resources are currently open, right? That's great to know as we're going into negotiations or we're deciding what to keep or cancel in our libraries. What type of open access do our vendors and publishers support? And how much of our researchers, or are our researchers, paying in APCs for publishing OA Gold? That's something we're really interested in learning about as well, especially as we're considering things like transformative agreements. So on this slide and the following slides, I do have a few tools that could potentially help us answer some of those questions. Some of these are free. Some have a paid subscription or low cost, but if your libraries have these, great. There are different ways that we can utilize tools to help answer these questions. So depending on how transparent these publishers are, we can get a list of OA and transformative journals, future plans for open access, and APC costs. And so this just takes time, really digging into looking at what these publishers are doing to support open and how much the libraries end up paying for it. There's also a tool called Dimensions, which they have a free, also paid subscription, which can tell you the percentage of OA content for specific journals and databases, which can be especially helpful if we're deciding, which journals we want to promote and keep in our collection, or which ones we can potentially, drop or swap out in a subscription. And then I'm sure many of you have heard of Unsub as well. So it is a paid subscription, it's a lower cost, and what this tool can do, it can forecast OA coverage in event of discontinued subscription coverage. So as we go into negotiations or talks with publishers, we can see, if we do end up, disinvesting in this large subscription package, how much of our current content, and it's all based on counter usage, will be covered by open resources, which is great to know. So when we're assessing OA authorship, we might want to ask, well, are our researchers publishing open access? And if they are, where are they publishing open access? So of course, we can look at our institutional repository, and this will be more comprehensive if you have an opt-out rather than opt-in policy for associated researchers contributing their work. This is great to see the green OA authorship activity where our researchers can freely deposit their work, or we can also see patterns of which publishers at least support the deposit of preprints or that gray scholarship. Again, dimensions, so we can see authorship information for specific researchers. Unsub, we can see authorship information through weight by title in a specific identified package, which can be especially helpful. And then if your institution subscribes to either Web of Science or Scopus or something like that, we can get authorship information at both the institution and the researcher level, and we can start to see patterns and trends. Where are our researchers publishing? We can look more specifically into which subjects, as well as where they're collaborating. And then of course we can go back to the individual publishers and the number of articles our researchers have published per year. For assessing OA usage, we want to look at how much OA content are our researchers using in our subscribed packages. Are our users accessing OA content through our catalog, right? That'd be great to know. And how are our users getting to OA content? And this is more complicated, and it could take a combination of a few tools. So we could look at our institutional repository. Also, some Counter 5 reports can be really helpful, especially as we're seeing usage by access type, which is a TRJ3 report, by year and month by publisher, and we can do this for our subscribed resources. We can also look at our link resolver usage, so how many clicks the link resolver has for specific resources in a catalog or in Google Scholar, and that will depend on your ILS and what you have access to there. Or if you have a paid subscription to some proxy service or something like LibKey, you can see how many users are accessing databases or collections and also from where. So subscription tools to evaluate OA can be pricey, and some might not work depending on your library policies. We had looked into using this proxy service to kind of see, to get this information of where our researchers were coming from and what type of content they were accessing. And because of the way our system was set up, it ended up not working for us. There's also limited staff capacity and knowledge about open resources and how to assess those. And we also have to think about where we should focus our time. So do we need to invest in assessing these open resources, and why? And then how will assessing open scholarship inform our collections decisions at our library? So if this is something that we've decided is important, which is something that we have done at Oregon State, we want to make sure that we have the knowledge and the people, or at least the conversations to prep for this kind of work now, before it really becomes very prevalent. So if you have any questions, you can contact me. I have my email address listed here. And then I also have a link to the white paper that we wrote about reopening the library, evaluating and scholarly publishing landscape, shaping future open services and structures. And this was the project that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, where we created prompts for generative ideas and thinking about how institutions can support open scholarship. So thank you very much.